I'm delighted to be here. I think this, and I agreed to come because I think this is a very important meeting, and this tour that you're doing is a very important tour. And the reason is that we're in the early days of a big change in the nature of the enterprise, in its deep architecture and structure. Enterprises are becoming networked, but in ways that most of us probably don't fully understand. And this networked enterprise is going to require massive bandwidth beyond what most people can imagine today. And this is obviously creating a huge opportunity for carriers and requiring capability like carrier Ethernet. But it's also going to lead to some huge changes in the corporation and the way that we think about information technology. I don't think there's ever been a more interesting or challenging time, really, to be in the general set of businesses that you're in. If you think about what's happened over the last, this decade, we've had the crash of the dot-coms, the telecom winter, a global technology depression, some kind of economic recession, global recession, perhaps the biggest since 29. We had the worst bear market probably since 29. We had the horrific events of 9/11 and their aftermath, new forms of military conflict, restricted mobility, WorldCom, Enron, biggest crisis of trust probably since 1929. And this has led to a lot of cynicism on the part of senior executives and a real sort of hunkering down mentality in business, where many senior execs, and I'm not talking about IT execs now, I'm talking about CEOs, have come to the conclusion that cost control is not only necessary, it's sufficient as a framework to get by. And this has led to all kinds of things, like articles in the Harvard Business Review entitled IT Doesn't Matter, where this was actually the best read article on HBR in a decade. Who has read that article or knows about that article? Yeah. Those of you who haven't, save yourself some grief reading it. But I actually know this guy quite well. His name's Nicholas Carr, and I've debated him probably 8 or 10 times now around the world. And he's got a very slick argument that information technology has become pervasive. And with IT and telecom converging, everyone has access to IT. Therefore, it no longer contributes to competitive advantage. It undermines it. Therefore, you should try and cut your IT and telecom budget by, say, 70%, if you can. And he's a very good debater, and it's a kind of slick argument. I have a big advantage in these debates in that he's wrong. But now what's happening is we're making a turn to growth. And everyone is wondering, well, what is the role of IT in business, and what kind of networks are we going to require? So what I did is I launched a syndicated research project. It was actually in total about $9 million project, where we looked at the changing nature of IT and telecommunications in the business. And we came to the conclusion, not only does IT matter, but that what you do is coming into the heart of the biggest change in the corporation, probably in a century. And that's what I'd like to try and explain to you today. And at the end of this, my goal is that you'll be thinking, gee, the bandwidth requirements of this new enterprise are far beyond anything that I had previously thought about. Now, let me begin by congratulating each of you personally for having been selected by Time Magazine as the Person of the Year. Well done. I know you worked hard for this. Congratulations. Sure, social networking is exploding. MySpace, I was actually there recently with the management. They're growing at 2 million new members per month. There are per week. There are 220 million people on MySpace. If you've got a kid in college, 85% of all college university students are on Facebook. There's a new blog being created every second of the day. 24 hours of the day. And Time selects you as the person of the year. Well, I'm here to tell you that all of that is so 2006, basically. Because now we're taking the next step. This is no longer just about social networking or hooking up online or creating a gardening community or putting a video onto YouTube. The internet and networks in general are becoming the basis of a new mode of production. And they're beginning to fundamentally change the way that we orchestrate capability in society to create goods and services, the ways that corporations innovate, and changing the ways that corporations are structured and interact with the rest of the world. Now, we were having a breakfast with some of the organizers of this event this morning, and I was reminiscing about in the mid-'70s when I got involved in this business. I joined Bell Northern Research, which was Canada's Bell Labs. And in 1978, we were implementing multifunction workstations that did everything that Microsoft Office does today on a Unix-based system plugged into this whole Bell Canada Northern Telecom set of networks, and in turn tied into the ARPANET. So we were basically on the internet. I was getting as many emails in 1977 as I was getting today. And back then we talked about how all these networks and this new network of networks was going to transform the corporation. And the first thing that we did, second week I was there, I had to take a 1-week course on telephony that focused on packet switching. And I thought, wow, this packet thing is crazy. How do they do that? Get all these little packets flying around on networks, and they all know where they're going and stuff like that. That was 30 years ago. Why am I just standing up here today and saying this is actually now happening? I think a lot of these ideas back then were ideas in waiting. I wrote a book in 1981 about the internet. I think my mother bought most of the copies. It was like a study in bad timing. These were ideas in waiting for some big changes to occur in the world so that they could finally come to fruition. Let me talk to you about 4 of them to set this up. The first is some big changes in technology. We now finally have the new web, or the so-called Web 2.0, and this ain't your daddy's internet, okay? What is the Web 2.0? Let me give you my view that we developed through this research. The first thing is that the new web, you access it not just through a PC tethered to a desktop, you access it through billions, soon trillions of inert, I'm typically covered in these things, inert objects that are smart communicating devices. My door here, the Hyatt, Grand Hyatt, is a smart communicating device. It has a chip in it, it's internetworked, and I'm guessing, because they had a renovation here recently, that the door has an IP address. I had a camera stolen from a hotel in Miami, and the door knew about me. It knew who'd been in and out of the room. We actually found an unauthorized access. So billions of inert objects that start communicating and sharing knowledge and become access points to the network. I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address. And all this stuff talks to itself and to each other. I have no idea what his microwave says to his refrigerator. He says it's got something to do with how to cook a pork chop. But he was bragging that his fence talks to his sprinkler. And I said, well, why would you care? And he says, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. So this is pervasive, broadband, ubiquitous computing. Ambient intelligence. The physical world is becoming smart. Imagine a world of trillions of inert objects talking to each other, talking to us, and enabling us to talk to each other differently. Theme number 2, of course, is broadband mobility. Some of you may remember, it's over a decade ago now, 95, I wrote a book called The Digital Economy. And I had this chart that held up really well, where I talked, because back then everyone was talking about the information highway. So I said, well, let's use this highway analogy for a second and see where it goes. So I talked about what we were using then, say, I don't know, 9,600 bits per second, if that was a 3-foot wide garden path, where are we going? I looked at the different kinds of bandwidth, and you got up to OC3, and the highway was like a mile wide. And then you start to get to the, OC192 and the stuff that you're talking about. This is like a really wide highway compared to the little information garden paths that we had. And you've got some funny players involved in this thing, too. Like if you want to see an interesting conversation, go on to YouTube and type in my name. And the first thing that comes up is a 1-hour conversation with me and Eric Schmidt, who's the CEO of Google, where I referred to Google as a digital conglomerate. And he kind of winced a bit, and I said, no, I'm not speaking pejoratively. Look at all the businesses you're in. You're a provider of high-speed wireless, San Francisco and eventually throughout the world. And telephony is just an application on a high-speed network, isn't it? Won't Google essentially become a telephone company? And I didn't hear him objecting to that idea. So there's an explosion of bandwidth that's occurring because the technology has now matured. Theme number 3, you put those two together, you get geospatiality. So just like you can go down to the MoMA here and rent a headset and walk around the art gallery or the whatever, and they'll, you're sort of browsing the gallery. You can also walk outside the gallery and intersect with the rest of the world. You can browse the physical world now. So you get something like a gypsy tour. This is you're driving along and it says you're coming up to Mount McKinley here, and 2 miles up is a little road on the left. Turn down there, 6 miles is a little waterfall. It's not on the map, but it's really pretty. And coming soon, it says to you, because it's noon hour and a sunny day, you might want to stop for a picnic. There's a great little store that sells fabulous croissant sandwiches just before the turnoff. Or you're sitting there in a Starbucks on Saturday morning, and it's like you're feeling social. So you wonder, is any one of my top 50 friends in the area? Well, go on to Places, and they'll say, yeah, actually 3 of your friends are in the area, and so you SMS them or something and say, come on over. Why don't we have a mocha kappa frappuccino half calf, half decaf latte together or something like that. Or you could put a digital sticky on a physical thing in the physical world. It's an intersection of digital and physical. So I could put a digital sticky on a bakery, and my son drives by. He's like 20, and his little thing goes off, and it says, or the thing in the car, whatever, and says, hey, Alex, you're at the bakery. We're out of baguette. Could you pick some up? Or you could put a digital sticky on a bad waiter in a restaurant in New York. How cool would that be? And then people walk into the restaurant and their little thing goes off and says, look out for the tall waiter with the mustache and the black hair. He's like really rude. And the waiter's wondering, why doesn't anyone want me to serve them? It's because you're a bad waiter. That's why. Coming soon to you, IntelliOne. Do you know about this? You don't need GPS to know the location of the device, because devices like cell phones give off all kinds of signals, including ambient signals. So if you take these signals, you triangulate them, and then you use geometry and calculus to determine the speed of movement of all cell phones, which means that you know the speed of movement of all traffic. So you can do stuff like with IntelliOne, I'm about to go home, give me the best 6 routes, and take into account traffic conditions and tell me the exact number of minutes it's going to take me to get home for each of those routes. You have something like that? You'll use it every day. Or you put a geofence around your 17-year-old daughter, that if she goes outside the geofence, this is like really important security stuff. You get advised and you know about it. The next one, requiring massive bandwidth, is, I see some of you buzzing about that one. There are all kinds of privacy implications. I actually wrote a book on that one too. But think about the shift from the old web, which was data and text, with some voice and a little bit and some graphics, to now true multimedia. So tape it off the internet. Way back, I used to talk about how the internet is going to suck television into its maw. Well, you've now got IPTV. You've got Tape It Off the Internet, has 140,000 TV shows that are available on the web. You go to the new PlayStation, And it's starting to look like a person. So we're in the early days of a whole new narrative now in entertainment. This is not a photograph. This is a real-time animation. And you may remember the great Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein made the first full-length feature film. He created that narrative that still exists 80 years later today. It was called Battleship Potemkin. Well, there's a new narrative that's emerging where you get to be one of the protagonists. And whether that's you being the bad guy in a soap opera, or you in some kind of corporate training exercise that involves real-time animation, this is placing massive demands on bandwidth. Then we have the rise of web services. Now, you all know about this, but let me sort of give you my view. These are a couple of books that I wrote where in hindsight I look pretty good. I'm not sure, honestly, I'd figured it out at the time. But the old web was based on HTML. What was HTML? That was a standard for the presentation of information, which is why during the dot-com period, everybody talked about websites, eyeballs, stickiness, clicks, page views, because that's what the web was about, presenting information. Remember, content is king. Well, the new web is based on XML and SOAP and UDDI. This is a lingua franca for distributed computing. The web is no longer just a platform for presentation of information or content. It's becoming a platform for computation. The web is becoming a giant computational platform in its own right, and it's enriched with services. And the sky's the limit in terms of the kinds of services that can become available. So in a sense, every time that somebody goes on the internet, you do something. You put a picture of your puppy onto Flickr, or you go onto a blog or something like that. You are, in a sense, programming this giant global computer. You put an XML tag on something, you are programming the internet, even though you don't know anything about XML. You know, Thomas Watson was famously to have said in the early 50s that the world will probably only need 5 computers. If he actually said that, and I can't find any evidence that he did, but if he actually said that, he would have been terribly wrong, 5 computers. He would have been off by 4, right? Because in a sense, the web is becoming this giant global computer that everybody programs. So rather than a desktop, you don't need a desktop. You need a web top, right? You don't need Microsoft Office and all that. So how much of PowerPoint do you actually use at any one time? You need what you need at that time. And even Microsoft understands this now. Ray Ozzie, the chief technology officer, a memo was leaked about 18 months ago, a couple of years ago, where he essentially said Microsoft is not going to be a software products company, it's going to be a services company. And a lot of these services we won't even sell. We may do it on an advertising basis. Or Yahoo Pipes. Anybody know about that? Yeah. Check it out. This is amazing technology that enables the mashup over the web of giant data sets. I'm not just talking about Google Maps versus apartments for rent or something like that in the United States. I'm talking about huge corporate databases being brought together. And the final big one is the rise of integration. The old web was separate from real IT. So the network out there was kind of like independent of what happened within the corporation. So within companies, the only way the web intersected with IT was around this thing called the intranet. Or companies had portals and things like that. Well, now you've got these amazing technologies like Ajax that are coming behind the firewall, and every company's got to figure out a strategy to migrate its entire IT infrastructure to the web. So this is a huge challenge because every company has this massive thing called the legacy. I mean, the irresistible force of the new web is meeting up with an immovable object of $4 trillion of installed base of heavy metal. And many of these systems that you have in your companies are old enough to vote and drink. And this is a huge challenge. How do you create the conditions whereby new investments contribute to a desired future as opposed to perpetuating the past? You know, where every time you spend money, you're building up your legacy and making it worse. God may have created the world in 6 days, but he didn't have an installed base to deal with. So I have to tell you people a funny story. I said that line about a couple of months ago now, I guess it was. And it was an event where it was a screen like this, but behind the screen was a big window. And unbeknownst to me, there was a thunderstorm shaping up while I was giving my talk. And I said this, well, God may have created the world in 6 days, but he didn't have an installed base. And just as I delivered that line, this huge bolt of lightning cracks across the window. The whole room shakes with thunder, and everybody's like, what's that? Then, of course, they all burst into laughter. But my only regret was it wasn't recorded, because I swear that'd be the number one thing on YouTube for a while. And the XML tag I would have chosen was Tapscott gets massive endorsement for big idea. Although I suppose there might be another explanation for that too. Anyway, so you put all that together. There is a new paradigm in technology that's emerging. It's high-speed, services enriched, ubiquitous, pervasive, multimedia computing that integrates fully with real IT. And IT is now being moved onto the web. This is an historic thing that we're in the middle of. Theme number 2. This technology revolution is intersecting with the demographic revolution. The children of the baby boom are the first generation to grow up digital. These kids are the bandwidth-hungry generation, and they're about to change the world. Who here has children or grandchildren under the age of 29? Hands, please. Wow, you're a prolific group. Those who put up your hands, which of those kids use a computer connected to the internet? Hands, please. Okay, so same group, put up their hands. So we have the first generation to grow up digital. You know something? These kids are different. I started studying these kids as a generation when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought, this is like 10, 12 years ago, at first I thought, my children are prodigies. And then I noticed that all their friends were like them, and the theory that all their friends were prodigies. Well, that was a bit of a stretch. So I started working with 300 kids, and I wrote this book in 1996. And I came to the conclusion, these kids have no fear of technology because it's not there. It's like the air to them. When your 10-year-old son is downloading an MP3 file, he's not thinking, gee, this MP3 compression format and peer-to-peer file sharing is really a disruptive technology. He's thinking about that he just got Alicia Keys' new song, right? If your 11-year-old daughter's chatting online, she's not thinking, wow, this text-based, real-time, synchronous communication mode is some amazing technology. She's thinking what her friends said. My son Alex, this is over a decade ago, he comes down from his bedroom and says, hey, Dad, check this out. I say, okay. I go up to his room. On the screen there, it's got this beautiful bitmap, almost three-dimensional picture of Mars. I've never seen anything so incredible. And he says, look at this, Dad, this is Mars. And I said, wow, that's amazing, Alex. Where'd you get that? And he says, well, I'm looking through this thing. It's called the Hubble telescope. And I'm sitting there thinking, my kid from his bedroom is kind of peering through one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology ever invented by humankind. And he's thinking, isn't Mars amazing? See, the technology is like the air. It's not there. Get ready. Now, this is the net generation. These are the first kids to be bathed in bits. They're the biggest generation ever, 80 million of them in the U.S. alone. And time online is not taken away from hanging out with your friends, learning the piano, talking to your parents, playing soccer, doing your homework. Time online is taken away from television. The boomers, most of you are boomers, watch 24 hours a week of TV per kid. These kids watch a lot less TV and they watch it differently. They don't come home and turn on their tube. They come home and they turn on their computer. And they're in 3 different windows, and they're talking on their cell phone. They got an MP3, thing going, and a video game on the side, and there's 3 magazines open, and they're doing their homework at the same time. And in the background or in a window, the TV's going. But what's happening here? Rather than being the passive recipients of somebody else's broadcast video, what are they doing? They're reading. They're searching for stuff, organizing information. They're collaborating. They're authenticating. They're telling their stories. Even with video games, they're having to remember things. My company right now is doing a $4 million research project on this generation. We've interviewed 11,000 kids. One of the sub-projects is headed by some brain scientists who explain that these kids are actually wired differently. Their brains are different. By the way, they don't multitask. It looks like it to us, but human brains don't parallel process. What they have is just infinitely better switching abilities than we do. They can switch so fast between these activities, it looks like they're actually multitasking. So furthermore, this is the first time in human history when children are an authority on something really important. I was an authority on model trains when I was a kid. Your kids are authorities on this big revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, learning, publishing, every institution in society. Rather than a generation gap like we had in the 60s, big differences between kids over values, lifestyle, ideology, and so on, what we have today is what I call a generation lap, where kids are kind of lapping their parents on the info track. And if you have a teenager in your house, you know what I'm talking about. Who does the systems administration in your home? So think about it. This is I'd encourage you to go check this out. You go to newparadigm.com. It's a 1-hour interview where I interviewed these 4 kids at the World Congress on IT. It was in Austin, Texas last year. This is in front of several thousand people. About over 100 sessions. This was the highest rated session at the conference. Got an emotional standing ovation at the end, out of the mouths of babes. So at the left there, Rahaf Harfouch, a Syrian, studying in Paris. Her boyfriend's in Toronto. So they keep video Skype turned on all day long to keep their relationship going. They cook together, they do the work together and stuff like that. I asked her, do you kids use email? And she said, email, not really. That's kind of like yesterday's technology. And I said, really, well, what do you use? She says, well, we use instant messaging and Skype, and we use Facebook. I mean, everybody's on Facebook. Use a social network to communicate. And I said, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? And she said, well, gee, that's kind of like a formal technology. It'd be good for, say, I don't know, sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. So we're all on email. These kids are on a rich multimedia environment that's called Facebook that has orders of magnitude greater bandwidth and demand requirements. Sitting beside her is Alison Featherstone Haw, who's the daughter of Brian Featherstone Haw, who's the CEO of Ogilvy One. It's just up the street here. And he pays her $25 a month to get her and a bunch of her friends to track their time on how they interact with media. He's very interested because he noticed that his daughter, when she watches TV, is time shifting and she's cutting out the ads. If you're a head of an ad agency, that's like the scariest thing you've ever seen. It's a whole generation that's bleeping out the television ads. They watch TV asynchronously or on a window or on a TiVo or something like that. Beside her is Sherry Kong. Sherry is 20 years old. She is hired by the government of New Zealand, who in turn has hired 80 students to teach the teachers of New Zealand how to use the internet in the classroom. I asked her, so what are the teachers like as students, Sherry? And she says, I have to tell you, they're awful. Like, they talk in class, they don't do their homework. I gave out 2 pink slips just the other day. And beside her is Michael Furtick. He's the granddaddy of them all. He's 24. I've known Michael since he was 12 years old, when he was the project manager on my website, growingupdigital.com. They made him the project manager as a 12-year-old because he was the oldest and most experienced on the team. Michael, when he was 16, had his own site, was getting 20 million page views per month, sold it for an undisclosed 7 or 8 figure sum. And so he's a wealthy young man. And although one of the news reports said it was probably only $1 million, I sent him an email. Michael, you sold it for $1 million. You should have called me. And he wrote back and he said, Don, legally I can't tell you how much I sold it for, but I can tell you I'm very happy. And he didn't want the money to buy a Ferrari, although he bought a cheap little car, but his mom had to drive around with him because he only had his learner's permit. He wanted the money to invest in his next new venture. It's called takingitglobal.org. There's 140,000 kids in 70 countries. It's a social network for kids that want to change the world. Takingitglobal, all one word, .org. So, by the way, a senior exec from a telecommunications company stood up at this in the question period, and he said, I just want you to know that I was about to make a multi-billion-dollar investment in some network architecture, and listening to this panel, I have changed my mind. That you guys are going to need so much bandwidth for your generation. This is a generation that's coming into the workforce, into the marketplace. The eldest are now 29. Get ready. Now, the next, you put those two together, you get a social revolution. I could show you 30 charts that all look like this. They all look the same, pretty much. They show the old, in red, the old HTML website that thinks that content is king, being eclipsed by the new XML-based community that understands that collaboration is what counts. That you be a context provider whereby people can collaborate, they will create their own content and harness the power of self-organization, unleashing the self-organization genie globally on planet Earth. So Flickr has now eclipsed web shots, and Dig is beating Slashdot, and Craigslist is the place to find a job on the web, not Monster, or to meet up with somebody, not Match. MySpace is killing MTV as a platform for music. You see, MTV says, we are a content provider. We put rock music and whatever, hip-hop, up on the web. MySpace says, no, we create the context whereby people can self-organize to put up their own content. There are 40,000 bands on MySpace, including my band. It's called Men in Suits. We used to do a concert every year whether our public demanded it or not. But we're a charity band, actually. We play, not that we're the charity. We play, you know. We raise money for good causes. Wikipedia is killing, oh, this is hardly fair. For those of you at the back of the room, there's a little red line along the bottom here, represents Britannica. If any of you are medical people, that would be called a flat line. These are now eclipsing the major media. Bloggers beating CNN.com. Opinions beating Consumer Reports. What's going on here? Well, let me tell you a humbling story to make the point. It was Christmas Day this year, well, just last year, and my son Alex, I gave him an advanced copy of Wikinomics for Christmas. And he said, gee, Dad, thanks. And he goes off, he starts reading the book. He comes back a couple hours later and says, hey, Dad, this is actually a good book. Anyway, so he says, I think I'm going to create a community on Facebook. I said, you mind if I watch? 15 minutes later, he's created the Wikinomicists of the World Unite community on Facebook. Another 15 minutes later, he's got 6 members. By the time we're eating turkey on Christmas Day, he's got 130 members in 7 countries. He's got 7 regional coordinators, a president, secretary, and chief information officer of the community. He sent out a PDF of the first 2 chapters of the book. I got kids writing in saying, we found errors in Mr. Tapscott's book. And the kids, the community, they're placing demands on me to create value for the community. How exactly will Mr. Tapscott be contributing to our community? What's going on here? Well, self-organization has been around throughout human history. Language was developed through self-organization. There was no central committee of the English language that said this will be called paper. But what used to take place over millennia can now happen on Christmas Day. Imagine me trying to create a community in 7 countries with 130 people when I was 20 years old. I couldn't have done it. Alex did it in 15 minutes. So this is a powerful new force. The world is now going to self-organize onto networks, and it's leading to the one that I'm here to talk to you about today, which is an economic revolution, a fundamental change in the nature of wealth creation and how we create goods and services. Now, you've heard talk, people say, well, come on, this is just another bubble, right? There's a British economist named Carlotta Perez, and she studied big innovations throughout history: internal combustion engine, electrical power, telephony, radio, whatever, television. And she's noticed that they all take a similar path. You start with experimentation, Ethernet, and then you get excitement, and you get speculation, and a lot of hot investment, and then you get a bubble, and then the bubble breaks. And then you move into decades of long-term deployment where the real impact of the technology becomes understood on business models and on the economy. We are now into decades of long-term deployment of this new web, where we're just beginning to learn how it's going to change business and how it's going to change the world. Okay? Exhibit A for what I just said, the Digital Conglomerate. This is a new species of business, unlike anything that we've seen before. I mentioned Eric Schmidt and Google, so let's pick on them. What is Google? What business is Google in? Search engine, advertising. That's how they make their money. They're, primarily an ad agency through a search engine, but Google is also a media company, right? They have YouTube, and they want to be the basis for television. Google is a retail company because they sell stuff. But once you sell stuff, you need a payment system. So eBay has PayPal. Google now has GPay. Once you have a payment system, you become, in a sense, a financial services company. So all the banks, the smart ones, are looking at Google as a potential competitor or partner or something to be avoided. Well, Google is also a software company. Now they say, well, no, we're not in the software business, and every week they release, web services that are targeted at the heart of Microsoft. Google is a hardware company. Google is the 4th largest maker of hardware in the United States, servers. Forget about ISO 9000 or whatever. These things are held together by duct tape in these server racks in football field-sized server farms that are eating up the power grid of California and soon Oregon and the western coast of the United States. So Google is entering into probably a dozen different businesses. We've never seen anything like this before. It's a new species of business that, because of a powerful technology platform, they're able to rapidly evolve into all kinds of different industries and different industry sectors. So what's happening here? Well, there are these 4 themes that in the enterprise, when I'm working with CEOs or senior execs of large companies, I'm saying you've got to embrace these 4 themes of Wikinomics, because the companies that are succeeding are doing that. Let me explain. And each of these has huge bandwidth implications. Theme number 1 is peering. Throughout the 20th century, we created wealth through this thing called the vertically integrated corporation. It did everything from soup to nuts inside the boundaries of the company. It's called vertical integration. Why was that? Well, there was a Nobel Prize-winning economist named Ronald Coase, C-O-A-S-E. And over 70 years ago, he wrote a paper where he asked a deceptively simple question. He said, why does this firm exist? If Adam Smith is right and the open market's the best mechanism to determine how goods and resources and so on are allocated in the economy, why isn't everybody an independent contractor? Why do you all work for companies? Why aren't we all independent contractors in the entire sort of process of production? And he said the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is collaboration costs. Now, he used the term transaction cost, but he was referring to the cost of collaboration. The cost of search, he said, 75 years ago. He said this. The cost of search, of finding all the right information to do something in an open economy, totally prohibitive. The cost of coordination, of getting all these people to work together. The cost of contracting. Very little activity in the economy required a separate contract. Totally prohibitive. And the great industrialists understood this. You know, Henry Ford had within the boundaries of the Ford Motor Company a power plant, steel mill, shipping company, glass factory. Why? Because the costs of collaboration in an open market were greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of the Ford Motor Company. Now, some of you may remember in the early 90s, I wrote a book called Paradigm Shift. And I said, well, just a second. I think networks are starting to drop these collaboration costs. The corporation is becoming more porous. And back then I called it the extended enterprise. Then we saw the rise of the web and the internet. And collaboration transaction costs dropped further. So Cisco was enormously successful. I think the main reason is that they were the first in that industry to figure out a network business model. You focus on what you do best, and you partner to do the rest. It was my little rhyme from back then in that period. And you can partner with partners for mission critical capabilities. So my wife has this little car. It's called an X3 from BMW. It's not made by X3 and by BMW. The car, the final assembly of the vehicle, is done by a company called Magna. So you have car companies that don't make cars, and computer companies don't make computers. And most of the companies providing telecommunications equipment here design their equipment, they market their equipment, but the actual fab is done by the contract manufacturers, the electronics manufacturing services industry, companies like Foxconn and Celestica and Selectron and Jabil and Flextronics and so on. So now what's happening is that collaboration costs are dropping so much that peers outside the boundaries of traditional corporations, or peers within companies, or companies acting as peers rather than as superiors and subordinates in a supply chain, can come together and innovate and create value. So think about it. If you can create an encyclopedia 10 times bigger than Britannica by 1 million people with no company, but the quality is just as good, what else could you create? Could you create software? Well, the Linux operating system is now the dominant operating system for medium and large-sized computers in the world. It has some big customers, like China. Could you create application software? There's 150,000 open-source application projects underway. Could you create a mutual fund? It's called marketocracy.com. No company. Could you create a physical good like a motorcycle? Well, you'll see in a sec you can't. So peering is a huge, new, powerful force. And that means that innovation and production is moving onto networks as opposed to being inside the boundaries of companies only. Theme number 2. Whoops, we missed theme number 2. Oh well. Theme number 2 is openness, transparency. You're being scrutinized like never before by customers, business partners, suppliers, employees, shareholders, various stakeholders. And they're scrutinizing you because they can. You're going to be naked as a corporation. And if you're going to be naked, well, fitness is no longer an option, okay? You better be buff, meaning that you need to have good value, but you need to have values baked into your DNA and your bones. And if you are buff, then you can use transparency as your friend. You can open the kimono, sort of like you can undress for success. And so companies are opening up, and they're sharing all kinds of pertinent information with the rest of the world. Theme number 3 is sharing of intellectual property. Whoa, this sounds like communism. That's what one important leader of the IT industry called it. Well, he's got a point. I mean, didn't Linux hurt Microsoft? Didn't MP3 hurt the record labels? Didn't Wikipedia hurt Britannica? If you move something into the commons and you share it, doesn't that undermine the legitimate right of companies to make a profit and hurt capitalism? Is this socialism? Well, what we found in the research is that no. If you have a portfolio of IP, some that you own and some that you share, that enables you to innovate better, to compete better, and to be more profitable. So IBM, rather than fighting Linux, embraced it. They gave hundreds of millions of dollars to the Linux community. They saved themselves $900 million a year maintaining and developing their own proprietary operating system. And they've created a platform upon which they built a multi-billion-dollar business. Oh yeah, and they stuck it to Microsoft in the process. So sharing is actually, it turns out for some IP, is a way to compete better. And the final one we call acting global. If you Google the expression think global, act local, you get millions of hits. If you Google the expression think global, act global, you get a bunch of mistakes of people who didn't get the expression right. I find this kind of curious. If it's Thomas Friedman is right, the world is flat, and there's a global economy, then why don't we want to be global corporations? Well, right now we're all a bunch of multinationals. Ralph Agenda is the CIO at General Motors. He's outsourcing $15 billion of IT. He says, none of these companies I'm dealing with are global. They're all multinationals. I need a global partner with global business processes, global IT, global integrated networks, and so on. So you kind of understand. I mean, we had global national corporations within a nation state. And when that corporation went to another nation state, it became a multinational corporation. It's not good enough. Furthermore, I'm not sure the world is flat. The world, as my friend Richard Florida says, is spiky. You've got these spikes, Silicon Valley. Now there's a big spike in London around financial services. There's a spike in Dubai around new buildings. But most of these spikes are moving to Asia. So I would say, rather than the world is flat, the world is a skewed binomial. Now, it's probably not as good a title for a book, but who's been to China the last 3 years? Okay? You know what I'm talking about. Half of the cranes in the world are in Shanghai. China is about to be the largest auto market in the world. It's very uneven. It's also the place you're most likely to be killed in a car accident. There's 500 million people who've never used a toothbrush. But you've got these Asian juggernauts now. Foxconn, ICICI Bank from India. Didn't exist 10 years ago. Greenfield Technology Platform. It's now the largest retail bank in India. It's coming into New York and Europe and so on. So companies need to figure out how to be truly global. So these 4 themes are combining with these 4 big drivers to shake the windows and rattle the walls of every company. This is your perfect storm. It's your basic category 6 business revolution. The world is moving on to the network. Now let me try and draw some conclusions for you and give you some concrete examples. There's a gold mining company named Goldcorp, and a banker named Rob McEwen took it over. I know this guy because he's my neighbor. He lives across the street. And which is how I discovered this story when he moved onto the street. I said, so what do you do? He says, well, I used to be a banker, but I'm now a gold miner. And he's sort of a funny guy, too. He introduced his wife at this big dinner party as she's a gold digger. But anyway, God, that's on tape now, isn't it? We're going to have to bleep that out. But although it is true. Anyway, his geologist couldn't tell him where the gold was, and he couldn't go into production. So he's a very frustrated guy. And after a couple of years, 3 years, he's ready to shut the thing down. But he's also a very curious guy. And he went to this meeting of YPO, Young Presidents, and he heard about this thing called the Linux operating system. And he said, I came back from that thing, my head was just spinning, and I was wondering, if my geologists don't know where the gold is, maybe somebody else does. So he did a very radical thing. He took his geological data, which in the mining industry is your biggest secret. It's kept in safes, high-security computer systems. He took his data and he published it for the world to see, and he held a contest on the internet called the Gold Corp Challenge. $500,000 for anybody who can tell me, do I have any gold, and if so, where is it? He got submissions from all around the world, 77 of them. They used techniques that he's never heard of, and he gave away his $500,000 in prize money, and for $500,000, he found $3.4 billion worth of gold, and the value of his company went from $90 million to $10 billion. And I can tell you, because he's my neighbor, he's a happy camper. What's going on? He did a renovation on his house now that he's a billionaire. What's going on here? Well, he adopted the 4 themes, right? Number 1, peering. He didn't say, I need a better head of geology, right? I got to hire some more geologists. Because, this is what we think, right? The uniquely qualified minds to solve all my problems are inside the boundaries of my company. Human capital is your most important asset. It goes out the elevator every night. No. He said, who are their peers? The submissions, 77 submissions, they came from not just from geologists, from engineers, from mathematicians, computer scientists. He had chemists giving organic solutions to these inorganic problems. The winner was a computer graphics company that built a 3-dimensional model of his mind. He peered. Number 2, he was open. He stood up in front of the world and he said, my name's Rob McEwen, and I'm head of this gold mining company, and I don't know if we have any gold. But we're going to find out, and you can trust me. Number 3, he shared his intellectual property, unheard of in the mining industry. He published his IP on the web. And 4th, he didn't act local, he acted globally. He viewed the world as his geology department, and he increased the value of his company by an order of magnitude. So this is leading to some new business models. These are the 7 that we've developed for Wikinomics, and each of these is a chapter of the book. I'm not going to spend any time on them, but I just want to give you a little snippet for each one and draw some conclusions for you. The first is what we call the Pier Pioneers. So you've got Wikipedia. Of course, this is a little humbling story. About 9 months ago, one of my employees went onto Wikipedia, and they entered the word Wikinomics as a word. Wikinomics is the theory and practice of harnessing mass collaboration for innovation, growth, and success, as defined by Don Tapscott in his upcoming book of the same title. Then he sends me an email and he says, hey Don, look at what I did. I just put Wikinomics into Wikipedia. And I thought, So I went there to check it out. 15 minutes later, it was gone. And there was this raging discussion that happened. And somebody says, well, I just Googled this thing. I got 60 hits. That's not enough to get into Wikipedia. Someone else says, well, Tapscott's a credible source. He invented these other terms. Somebody else says, yeah, but what if his new book, Wikinomics, bombs in the market? And they deleted the thing. Now, as someone who studies these things, I was kind of angry. But I was also kind of impressed because Wikinomics wasn't yet a word. Now, if you Google Wikinomics today, you get more than 60 hits. Actually, I did it just last night to check it out. You get 2.7 million hits on Wikinomics. And so it's become a word. There's more hits for Wikinomics than for the long tail or the world is flat. It's not just a book now, it's a word. And sure enough, Wikinomics is in Wikipedia. Now, I didn't put it there, and I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole, but the definition is pretty good. So this is on the right is Linus Torvald. I interviewed him in front of this audience in Rome, and I said to him, well, if you can create an operating system this way, what else could you create in software? And he says, well, Don, I'm a bad predictor of the future. To which I chortled. Yeah, right, Linus. You don't predict the future. You just create it. He says, no, I'll tell you why I say that. He says, I thought no one would ever want to create an open source database because databases are so boring. This would be the operating system guy view of the world, right? It's like the New Yorker view of the world, you know, databases are so boring. But he says, but now, I mean, you've got OpenSQL. This is a real going concern. I don't think there's any class of software that will not be developed through an open source model. So sure enough, 150,000 open source application projects. And just as Red Hat was to Linux, now SpikeSource is to these 150,000 applications. Every night they do hundreds of thousands of tests. And as these applications become enterprise ready, they release them into the enterprise. So if you're Oracle or SAP or Microsoft, you can bet that you're watching this very closely, and so you should be. Think of all the software the world is going to need. It's not going to be created by software companies. You just can't. Half of planet Earth would have to be in a software company. The software is going to be created by people outside of the boundaries of software companies, and for that matter, in many cases, of traditional organizations. Marketocracy is a mutual fund on the web. The stocks that go into the fund are picked by the 100 best stock pickers on the internet. Zopa, a peer-to-peer bank. So Citi, JP Morgan, whatever, paying attention. You got some money, I need some money. What do we need a bank for? All we need is a trust syndication method, right? That's what the eBay feedback form is. It's a method for syndicating trust. Theme number 2, ideagoras. Remember the Roman and Greek agora? It's a market, right? These are agoras for ideas or for innovations. So Procter & Gamble is looking for a molecule that'll take red wine off a shirt. You do the math, okay? Help me out here. They got 9,000 chemists inside the boundaries of P&G. They have 1.5 million chemists outside the boundaries of P&G that they can now get to because these chemists are organized into ideagoras, like the Innocentive network. Innocentive has 140,000 scientists on the network. So P&G puts out the request. There's a grad student in New York or a retired chemist in Taipei. They come up with a molecule. They get paid like $150,000. Half of all of P&G's innovations will come from outside of the company. Whoa. And that's by the end of this year. Well, what's going on? Well, we think that the uniquely qualified minds to do things are inside our boundaries. No, they're not. They're out there on the network. So, how do you get the internal chemists to want to find something outside? How about the NIH, not invented here syndrome? At P&G, they call it the PFE syndrome, proudly found elsewhere. You just line up the compensation system. The chemists at P&G get comp based on P&G innovating. Doesn't matter where it comes from. So these things are popping up all over the place. We're tracking dozens of them right now, these ideagoras. And you can expect that they will cover all aspects of economic and human activity. So I'm a governor of a state, and I have a city that's flooded because the levees broke, and I need to get trillions of gallons of water out of the city, and I want to do it in 3 days rather than conventional pump technology. It'll take me 2 months. How do I do that? Seekers and solvers coming together in ideagoras. Crowdsourced software, Cambrian House, the crowd develops the software. Are you doing this? You're trying to develop, you're a carrier, you're trying to develop carrier, Ethernet, whatever services and capabilities. Are you just doing it with the minds inside your company, or are you reaching out to be able to do it? Topcoder.com, 140,000 programmers that are now organized on the internet to do stuff. And you're looking for a little routine or a module or something. Maybe you don't need to develop it. Save yourself 6 months and, $1.2 million of developer time, and just go buy the thing. In some cases, that's an example of some numbers where someone went and bought something for $12,000. The next is prosumers. How do you turn your consumers into producers? Those of you carriers, turning your consumers into producers of network services and capabilities. Or if you're in an enterprise here, turning your customers into producers of your product and services. So these are some photographs, if you like, from Second Life. And who here has been to Second Life? Anybody? Okay. Homework assignment number 2. Go check it out. Actually, homework assignment number 1 would be go onto Amazon and buy Wikinomics in massive volume. Okay? Christmas is coming soon. You look like people with friends. No, seriously. Okay, see this guy in the top picture right in the middle. There's a very tall guy, looks about 30 years old. He's very thin, he's got a lot of hair, sort of spiky, a really nice dark suit. That's me. Okay. Of developer time, just go buy the thing. In some cases, that's an example of some numbers where someone went and bought something for $12,000. The next is prosumers. How do you turn your consumers into producers? Those of you carriers, turning your consumers into producers of network services and capabilities. Or if you're in an enterprise here, turning your customers into producers of your product and services. So these are some photographs, if you like, from Second Life. And who here has been to Second Life? Anybody? Okay. Homework assignment number 2. Go check it out. Actually, homework assignment number 1 would be go onto Amazon and buy Wikinomics in massive volume. Okay? Christmas is coming soon. You look like people with friends. No, seriously. Okay, see this guy in the top picture right in the middle. There's a very tall guy, looks about 30 years old. He's very thin, he's got a lot of hair, sort of spiky, a really nice dark suit. That's me. Okay? My avatar gave this lecture in Second Life, so you can see some of my screens and stuff in this virtual world. Now, I have to tell you how I ended up with this good-looking young avatar. I don't have time to design my own avatar, but I want to look nice, okay? So I got this designer. She's about 18 years old, and she says, what do you want to look like? And I said, well, I want to be male. I want to look really old, like I've been there and done that, because I've been in this industry for decades. And I don't want to look like a hippie, okay? So put me in a suit or something. And she says, okay. And so it's time to give my lecture. She says, okay, bring your avatar on the screen. So I bring this guy walks onto the screen, and it's that guy. And I said, what is this? I asked for somebody who's really old. And she said, yeah? Everything is relative, I guess. She was 18, so. But the point here is not all this wacky stuff about Second Life. A lot of your companies are in there. Wells Fargo was one of the first companies to go into Second Life. But there's now, 5-6 million people? There's probably only like 500,000, 600,000-700,000 that are active. But that's a lot of people in a virtual world. The Second Life money is now pegged to the US dollar as a floating currency. And those of you who've been there, it's kind of odd, isn't it? Isn't it a weird feeling going into this place? And right at the top there, that's a virtual book signing and cocktail party. And we're right there, we're having a conversation. Someone figured out that my wife is the head of the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. So the discussion there was, how do we get the Toronto Symphony to do a virtual concert in Second Life? And someone says, well, I have a concert theater. I'd give it pro bono. And someone else says, well, I actually own a production company. I'd be happy to promote this thing. The point of this whole story is none of that. The point of the story is, here's a company. It's called Linden Labs that owns Second Life. 99% of its product is created by its customers. When I created that avatar, I was building the Second Life product. How do you get your consumers to become producers or prosumers? So the record industry is the poster child on how to do this wrong. Every time their customers want to organize to do something that's in their interest, they fight it. So somebody takes the Beatles' White Album, remixes it with Jay-Z's Black Album to create the Gray Album. Sales of the White Album go up, sales of the Black Album go up, and he gets sued by the record labels. I mean, the industry that brought you the Beatles is now hated by their customers. They're suing children. Anyway, setting that aside, Lego has a way better thing, right? Lego Mindstorms. Kids build robots, but because of kids in the generation lab, they know more than their parents. The kids hacked the code. They started sharing these Mindstorm applications. Lego had a choice. It could be like the music industry and decide to sue the children, or it could open the whole thing up, which is what they did. They opened up their APIs. There's now thousands of software developers between the ages of 70 and 4 that are developing Mindstorm applications. The final chapter of Wikinomics is a wiki. So come and help us write the chapter. Why don't you go there and create a section on carrier Ethernet? I know for a fact there's not one on that because I was there and checked it out. And wouldn't that be cool? Now, another funny story. So my publisher comes to me and said, Don, this is great, Wikinomics, it's the big book. We want to do another version for Christmas. And why don't we take the wiki and we'll take all the best ideas from that and we'll create a new final chapter for the book that we sell. And I said, well, I can't do that. The wiki's done under a Creative Commons license. I don't own the IP. I can't exploit it commercially. And my publisher says to me, well, why would you do such a thing? And I said, hey, you're my publisher. You should read the book. You know? I figure if I'm the context provider for the definitive guide of the 21st century corporation, even though I'm not making money off it, it's going to help me. So we now have prosumed clothing designed by customers on the internet. Theme number 4, I'm out of time here, so I'm just going to end it up. The new Alexandrians, the sharing of science. Imagine if the biotech companies had decided to try and own a chunk of the human genome. No. They cooperated on the net to place the genome in the commons. And a rising tide is lifting all boats. You've got thousands of collaborations around the world, around science now. This is Nature's Google Earth Avian Flu mashup. So a nurse in Hong Kong discovers the avian flu. The local hospital is trying to keep it quiet. She puts it up on the web. This is now how scientists are tracking the evolution of the avian flu. And then we've got the whole problem of CO2 emissions. You know, this is a big problem. It's no longer a partisan issue. Everybody agrees we need to reduce CO2 emissions by 50% in the next 30 years, or else we turn into Venus. That's a big difference between Venus and Earth. Venus has its carbon in the atmosphere. Ours is in the ground. We're putting ours in the atmosphere. So in those 30 years, the global economy will double in size. So this is a big problem. This is not about buying a Prius or something. It's called reindustrializing planet Earth. How are we going to do this? As Thomas Friedman points out, his next book is about this topic, that the most aggrieved people by this situation are not yet born. You know, for our children, things are going to get nasty. But for their children, it's going to be really, really ugly. So there are now thousands of mass collaborations underway around the world to do something about this. Scientists, school kids, communities, architects. And it turns out that the killer app for mass collaboration may be saving the planet, literally. Thomas Friedman makes this point about we're actually changing the weather. Think about it. You know, Mark Twain famously said about the weather, everyone's talking about it, nobody's doing anything about it. We need to change the weather. How are we going to do that? Theme number 5. Could you open your platform to the world? Amazon did. They opened up their APIs. There are now 200,000 programmers building capability on the Amazon platform. So you're a mom and pop business in the Bronx, or you're Target, or Target, as my daughter calls them. You now move your entire business onto the Amazon's infrastructure. You use Amazon for marketing, inventory, logistics, distribution, e-commerce, payment. This is extraordinary. A third of all of Amazon's revenue comes from the fact that it opened up its APIs. How could you open up your APIs to the world? This is an interesting one. I'm a customer of this. It's called PickSpot. Customers in 5 minutes can build a rich media community. If you're a carrier, you should consider using PickSpot. Now, full disclosure, I started as a customer, and I like this company so much I'm now an advisor to it. I just like to be open about these things. But the Wikinomics community, our next version, is people can go on there and they can create a carrier Ethernet community in the Wikinomics community with full video. And it's got full collaborative filtering and 268 kudos for this particular clip and so on. Theme number 6, production is moving on to the web and onto the internet. So Boeing says, the new 787 Dreamliner, we're going to peer produce this thing. It's going to be completely different than any aircraft ever built. See, the old model, the Airbus model, is that you create a 30,000-page spec and you put it out to your suppliers, right? Because the unique and qualified minds who figure things out are inside the boundaries of your company, right? So you create the spec. And then you beat up on your supply chain. It's all hierarchical supply chain. And then they give you parts, and then you put it all together over a couple of months in your factory. Boeing says, no, you're not our suppliers. You are peers. You produce important parts of the aircraft like the engine, the fuselage, the electronics, the interiors, the entertainment systems, which after the engine are the second most costly thing in an aircraft. And we're not going to create a spec. We're going to give you a 20-page document saying what we're trying to achieve with this aircraft, and we're going to co-innovate it. They created this mind-boggling global ecosystem, and this plane is so great. There are more orders faster for this plane than any other plane in the history of aircraft manufacturing. And Airbus, the old way, people say it may never come to market. It's not that mass collaboration is a better way of building the most complicated product I can think of. It's the only way. Well, what are the bandwidth requirements for that? The design of a new generation aircraft being shared globally on this mind-boggling planetary ecosystem. Then the design feeds into production. And get ready for where this is going. The Chinese the motorcycle industry is a whole bunch of little companies, and they all make a part. And they get together in tea houses and on the internet to figure out how all this stuff should go together. There's no OEM. There's no Harley or Yamaha pulling all the strings. This is now the largest motorcycle industry in the world. And get ready for the $1,500 open source car from China as well. Manufacturing of physical goods is moving on to the network. And finally, within the boundaries of corporations, we call this a Wiki Workplace. Are you using wikis, jams, social networks, blogs, collaborative filtering, RSS feeds to transform the way that you collaborate within your company? Because you know what? You do this, you transform the metabolism of innovation and collaboration. That's what we found. And we've researched this very extensively. So Best Buy has geeks in the 14,000 geeks in the Geek Squad that design products. Well, how did they do that? Well, the first one they said, let's build a better thumb drive, better, memory stick, and like a better mousetrap, right? So they put this out to the geeks. And the geeks all come back instantly and say, well, the big problem with the thumb drive is that you always lose the cap. So they built a swivel cap Geek Squad thumb drive that's now the best-selling thumb drive in the world. So Best Buy is now using these tools, and they report that this is changing the way that they collaborate. So just to close then, these are 7 new business models where this is not about dating online. This is changing the way we innovate and produce things. Value creation is moving on to the network. And there's some obvious implications of that for you. How are we going to create a global network that has the massive bandwidth requirements for a whole new model of how we orchestrate capability in society and how we create wealth? This, if I may use that term, is a paradigm shift. And when you get one of these, you get a crisis of leadership. Because a paradigm is a mental model, right? And paradigms put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. And they're often based on a set of assumptions that are so strong that we don't know that they're there. The earth is at the center of the universe. That was a paradigm, right? The big problem in the world is communism. Remember that one? I was in Berlin last week, and the wall is now down, although they've left a chunk of it up. But that was the dominant paradigm, the bipolar world, for the better part of this last century. Something can come along in art, science, politics, whatever, that causes a shift to occur. And when that happens, you get dislocation, you get conflict, you get confusion and uncertainty. New paradigms are nearly always received with coolness. I'm guessing many of you in this room know what it's like to be received with coolness. End-to-end Ethernet out there on the carrier network. You know something? Vested interests fight against change. And leaders of the old paradigm are often the last to embrace the new. How's your company going to find leadership for transformation if you're a carrier? Or if you're an enterprise, this is a huge change in the basic architecture of the corporation, the modus operandi of wealth creation. How is your company going to find the leadership to do this? Well, my final factoid for you is we've studied thousands of organizations. Do you know where leadership comes from? It can come from anywhere. Chairman, CEO, business unit manager, a telecom manager, secretary. We documented a story of a secretary who was a key person in the transformation of a division of Citi. And she had what it took to be a leader. She willed it. The person at the top can't learn for the organization as a whole anymore. Things are getting too complicated. Which is why leadership is each of our personal kind of opportunity, if you like. Anyone can be a leader if you will it. So I'll leave you with that thought. There was a French pilot from the Second World War. His name was Saint-Exupéry. And he said, we should welcome the future, for soon it will be the past. But we should respect the past, for it was once all that was humanly possible. I think back to my days in the mid-'70s at Bell Northern Research and packet switching and, this vast network of networks. Well, I suppose we all in this room did what was possible. But another Frenchman, Victor Hugo, says there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. The time has come for the new web, for a new generation of young people for whom bandwidth is their birthright, and for some fundamental changes to the enterprise and how we create value. And the time has come for a global network that has the capability for this vast new promise of information technology. And hopefully the time has come for each of you to find the leader within you to change your company, and in doing so, to change the world. One thing for sure is the next period will not be boring. So I'm going to be around the rest of the morning. I look forward to chatting with any of you. Thanks very much. Thank you.